Welcome to SportsBeat KC, a sports podcast by the Kansas City Star. I'm Blair Kerkhoff. So this is the first time I've hosted this podcast since late November. That's when I was diagnosed with something called hairy cell leukemia. Yeah, I'd never heard of it either, the hairy cell part, but there it was, coursing through my veins. I've been mostly laying low since then, but I'm feeling better. The doctors say things are trending in the right direction, and I'm ready to get back to work, at least on a limited basis. It starts with today's podcast. No better way to re-engage than talking with sports columnists Vahe Gregorian and Sam McDowell. Sam's new to the Post, and he's off to a great start. We discuss his new role at the Star, and the three of us talk about what's making headlines these days. The Chiefs, always. Sam takes us through what they could be thinking with the current roster and in free agency. We also chat college basketball, the Big 12 and SEC tournaments approach, with KU entering the event at T-Mobile Center as the top-seeded team, while Kansas State and Missouri entered the tournaments in preliminary round games. So how secure do coaches Bruce Weber and Cuonzo Martin feel about their jobs this week? We talk about that. Okay, let's get started on SportsBeat KC with Vahe and Sam. Okay, where were we when we last podcasted together, guys? Well, I'll tell you where we were. I know exactly where we were because I listened to it recently. It was the Chiefs-Cowboys post-game show, basically, of SportsBeat Live. And that was the weekend before Thanksgiving. And the idea was to take the rest of the week off for Thanksgiving break. As it turns out, I took the next 3.5 months off. But let me just tell you how happy and pleased I am to be joined by Vahe Gregorian and Sam McDowell, the two columnists, sports columnists for the Kansas City Star. And that's something that wasn't true. At least half of it wasn't true 3.5 months ago. So Vahe, great to see you as always. And Sam McDowell, welcome aboard as the new Star columnist.
Appreciate it. It's awesome to be here. I told Jeff this when he made this official, but I really don't know any other place where this would have worked out. And that's mostly just because of the people I work with. You guys know, but they probably don't know on the listeners that I am not afraid to ask questions to you guys pretty consistently. And that's purely the reason why I think this all happened. I mean, I don't think I'd be here without constantly asking people questions who I felt like have long known more than I have about how to do this job.
I need to respond to the point about Thanksgiving and just say, Blair, first and foremost, I think we're all giving thanks just to see you after all this long slog and to have a chance to be with you in this capacity. It's very uplifting. I couldn't be more grateful for that. I can't be more grateful than to see Sam in this job. And of course, the other Sam, let's see what he calls you, Junior or 2.0, or you call yourself 2.0. Right. The other guy, we miss him a lot. But I know he's thrilled to see you in this seat too. And so we got a lot to be thankful for.
Yeah, we have the Sams in this process. We said bid farewell to Sam Mellinger, who is the Vice President of Communications for the Kansas City Royals, and doing a smash-up job, by the way.
Yes. We've got that ball rolling.
It's quite a time to be communicating.
Hey, I wanted to cover a lot of topics with you guys because, look, we could have, there's Chiefs, there's conference basketball tournaments, and we can talk a little bit about what's going on in baseball. Sporting Kansas City got its first win. The Current's about to get going. But let's, before we do, let's go back, Sam, to you. You've been at the Star for 10 years, right? Is it about 10 years?
Yeah, it'll be 10 years in August.
And I think what's cool about what you're doing now is you've done everything, a little bit of everything at the Star in terms of your coverage menu, high schools, the soccer scene, the men and the women, some obviously Chiefs beat writer for the last 2 years, along with Herbie Teope. And, you took your turn out at Kauffman Stadium with the rest of us covering Royals games and doing features as well. So it's just, it's great to see somebody who is of the area and and getting the job that you have gotten. And that was true of Sam Mellinger as well. Sam is from the area, and it's neat that they replaced one Sam with another who has a lot of local knowledge. You know what it is to be a Kansas City sports fan, and I think that's a great advantage to you.
Yeah, I grew up going to the games. What's interesting is I never really anticipated being a columnist. When I got into the business, it was my goal just to work at the Star in some capacity. So I felt like 10 years ago when I started here, like that was what I wanted to do, was just work at the Kansas City Star. And as you guys know, Blair, you've written a lot of columns on colleges too, that, it's a different form of writing. And so I just had never really stepped out into this world that I'm doing now. And I think, and sometimes it probably shows more than others that it's new to me, but, I always loved writing features on all those beats, and I loved writing about the people aspect of sports. And I do think that there's a greater opportunity to do that in this new role than ever before.
Well, you've always had an opinion. Now you get to type it and see it printed.
Well, but what really hurts me is so many times I've made the joke to Vahe, if I was a columnist, I would really go after this. Now I can't make those jokes anymore.
It's like the old thing about the assistant coach moving to the head coach's seat. You never knew how different that seat looks.
Yep.
when you move over.
It's only 18 inches away, right? So, all right, let's jump in a little bit. Well, actually, what we'll do is talk a little bit about some of the most recent things that you each have written, because they were terrific columns and of great interest. Let's stay with Sam. The Sunday column, Sam, on the Chiefs, and you were at the Combine last week, and you listed kind of 5 moves that you think they should make. Some of them sort of general in purpose, but you did drill down on a few positions like defensive line and that wide receiver. So what your very first one was the defensive line, something that I don't think we think about when we consider how the Chiefs lost in the AFC Championship game to the Bengals. Just, you didn't, the blame didn't go to the defensive line when they probably should have shouldered more than their what they were credited for.
Yeah. I think that the defensive line, when you take Patrick Mahomes' baffling second half out of the equation, is probably second on the list for the reasons they lost that game, because it was their most distinct advantage going into the game. And they got 1 sack. And you look at the 2 games around it that sandwiched that game, they had 16 sacks, with the Titans and the Rams. So that is one that they will, that's the step they're going to take. They're going to overhaul the defensive line. I think it's, by the end of it, it could look similar to the offensive line, except you still have Chris Jones in place, where the offensive line last summer just got a total overhaul. But I think those other ones on the list are a little bit different than maybe the Chiefs thinking. I think they're so focused on the defense that the wide receiver 2 is going to be considered a luxury or a bonus. And maybe they look in the draft for a receiver. Maybe they look in the second wave of free agency. But I think you stack what's best too. I think if you have the opportunity to make either side of the football the very best in the NFL, that you should take advantage of that. The Chiefs are still a top 5 offense, but they're no longer the very best offense in the NFL. And I think it's because they don't have a counterpart to what Tyreek Hill does. If a team is going to consistently prevent him from doing what he does best, you've got to find somebody else who can really punish the underneath stuff if they're going to drop their safeties so deep.
Sammy Watkins did a little bit of that in his time with the Chiefs. I agree. I do think that you need someone in between Hill and Kelsey. Maybe that's not the best way of putting it, but someone along with Hill and Kelsey to be a major threat. I agree with that. Back to the defensive line a second. Do you expect, what is the expectation for Frank Clark and Melvin Ingram?
So Melvin Ingram, I think, is going to have to decide whether or not he wants to play another year. And if he does, I think Kansas City will be attractive to him. With Frank Clark, he's got a significant cap hit they can save. I think it's $19 million by releasing him with the post June 1 designation. But there's also a wiggle number that I think Frank Clark wants to be back. I should say that up front. And I think there's a number that they could potentially find to where this cap hit is pretty similar based on a restructuring of a contract. And that's why you haven't seen him released yet, because I think Frank Clark is going to have the opportunity to at least gauge, and when I say Frank Clark, I mean his representatives, to gauge what else could be out there in terms of an offer. And based on the way he played last season, my answer to that is probably not much. I could see Seattle being interested in bringing him back, but not for a significant guaranteed contract. So if his agent last week at the Combine determined that there's not a big market for Frank Clark, perhaps something more of a restructure makes sense. And I think that if they do that, he's got to come back in a little bit of a different role. I don't think he can be a guy that you count on to play every down, because that was a real weakness for the Chiefs last year, is getting pressure off the edge.
And we're recording this on Monday. There was some reports.
Thanks for the heads up, just in case we learned in an hour that Frank Clark has been cut.
Well, the reason I bring it up is that there are some reports nationally that the Chiefs are going to apply the franchise tag to Orlando Brown, which was, listen, if that's true, that just confirms the speculation that we all had. Right move for the Chiefs to franchise tag Orlando Brown?
I don't think you can give up what you gave up last offseason and then not keep him around for more than 1 year. I mean, that was too much to give up for a rental. Orlando Brown also got better as the year progressed. We know that he'd played left tackle before, but not for a guy that drops the way Patrick Mahomes drops back. So now Mahomes made adjustments as well, which is an adjustment he's long needed to make as far as moving up in the pocket to account for the way Orlando Brown, because when he gets beat around the edge. But I thought Orlando Brown, based on what I saw in training camp, had a better season than I anticipated. I thought he was going to struggle based on what I saw in camp. And he got better as the season went on. I don't see how you could have traded for a guy like that and expected him to be better than the season he had.
It's Sam, one thing, and I know you've thought a lot about this, but you've seen it up close in so many ways. And I find this whole process so interesting. I mean, I believe you have a real sense of how the dominoes have to fall, how the dominoes have to be set up. X, Y, and Z have to be accounted for before, A, B, and C can happen. Do you feel like there's a sequence coming here that we ought to understand? I mean, maybe it starts with Orlando Brown. How does one thing affect the next into the next, that as you see it?
Well, you do have to be under the cap by the time the new year league year starts next Wednesday. So right now they do not have the cap space to account for whatever that franchise tag is going to be. It's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 17, 18 million bucks. They don't have that much cap space. They're going to have to make a subsequent move before next week to account for that. Whether it is what we mentioned before, cutting Frank Clark. If you give Tyreek Hill an extension, which they are in negotiations with him about keeping him around long term, that can create, I think it's another $13 million. You also could convert, the way Patrick Mahomes, the brilliance of his contract really is it's all in bonuses, workout bonuses, roster bonuses. You can convert that and pay that down the road instead. Now, the danger in that is you can get yourself in a bind in later years. So I think based on conversations I had the last week at the Combine, they would prefer to try and eat some of that bonus this year. But they've got to make other moves in order for that to happen. If they get in a spot next week where maybe the Tyreek Hill extensions hit a snag, I don't anticipate that, but maybe they do. Maybe they want to keep Frank Clark around. Not at that number, but maybe there is a number that makes sense. And therefore, the move is to look at Patrick Mahomes' contract and try and kick some of that money down the road. Of course, free agency opening next week. It depends on who else you want that might be out there as well, whether or not you got to make some of those moves.
It's a deep draft. I keep reading that has plenty of, and pretty good on the defensive side, but I'm not sure difference makers are going to be available for the Chiefs when they draft unless they move up, right? And Ed Veach is a general manager who tends to move up. He doesn't go back. He moves up. So I suppose that we'll certainly talk more about the draft as it approaches next month, but I just don't know if the draft is going to be able to produce somebody for the Chiefs that can make an impact where they need it the most this time. Yeah,
because there's sort of a good news, bad news there. The good news is that where the draft is deep is where the Chiefs have positional need. it's deepest at edge rusher. But the top premier talent, immediate impact talent, exactly what you said, Blair. Those guys are gone by the top 10 picks because that's a premier position. So I do think if they want to get somebody who's going to solve their problem and not be a project, they would have to move up. Now, they have an extra third-round pick because of the Ryan Poles. They got compensated for Ryan Poles getting hired by the Chicago Bears as a minority hire. So they do have an extra pick to work with there if they wanted to potentially move up. But to me, the broader story here is the fact that they need to be collecting draft picks because of those contracts we just mentioned. They're going to have cheap labor and productive cheap labor on their roster. And the only way to do that is to collect draft picks and not give them up.
If they can duplicate last year's draft when it comes to success of half of the draft class turning out to be pretty useful. And talk about cheap labor. That's exactly what the Chiefs hope to get out of every draft. But last year's proved to be pretty, not pretty, but very productive for the Chiefs. Hey, let's take a break. And when we come back, we've got some college basketball, some Royals, and some sporting and current to discuss. Hey, it's Blair. We have a special subscription offer for SportsBeat KC listeners, unlimited digital access to the Kansas City Star's award-winning sports coverage. Sign up now for 1 year of Sports Pass for access to all the sports news, features, and columns presented on the kansascity.com site, and it's only $30. That's a 40% savings off our regular rate. Your subscription will automatically renew after the initial term at $50 unless you tell us to cancel. Your subscription helps support the sports coverage of kansascity.com and the Kansas City Star, and that support has never been more important. Please visit kansascity.com. Back on SportsBeat KC with star columnists Sam McDowell and Vahe Gregorian. And as always, Vahe, thanks for listening. You were at Allen Fieldhouse on Saturday to watch Kansas at the moment win its 20th Big 12 championship in 26 seasons of the league. And of course, a couple hours later, Baylor beat Iowa State, which moved the championship into a co-situation. Baylor and Kansas each finished 14-4 in the Big 12. Kansas gets to be the number one seed in the Big 12 tournament that starts on Wednesday, but quite a game at Allen Fieldhouse for Kansas to win that game, shooting 31% for the game. Didn't look good at all offensively. The conference player of the year, as we just found out, Ochai Agbaji missed his first 10 shots and was 1 for 11 from the field, and they still managed to be the ranked Texas team. So, obviously the mood was great, and it's Kansas, it's senior. One of the incredible stats that came out of that game is they went to a 39-game winning streak on Senior Day. Isn't that something? That's incredible.
Let's start with that, because I guess I had kind of vaguely known that. And, just last year they beat number one Baylor on Senior Day to extend it to 38. But, you don't get the scheduled patsies on Senior Day. I mean, that's 11 of those games. I think 11 is the right number, including the Baylor game last year and Texas game this year, were against ranked teams. So, I mean, to put it in perspective, I think Jesse Newell told me he wasn't born when they last lost a Senior Day game. I think Larry Brown was the head coach. So that's a little bit of a testament to something. And the other thing that I appreciate, all the Big 12 titles they've won, but it took on a little different dimension to see 20 of them out there on the court. They brought them out on the court for the Senior Day speeches, like 19 of them out front. And then, of course, the variable of this 20th one. So, look, hats off to them. This was a kind of a rotten game to watch. I mean, there was but it was always close, and neither team led by more than 6 until overtime, and KU ended up pulling away by 7. I do think it says something about a team that has been mostly really good offensively to kind of win by grinding it out on a horrible offensive day. Now, what we don't know is whether, the wisdom of my column that this says how they're going to be able to go forward, and tells us we don't know if that's going to last until Thursday. If they lose Thursday or Friday, then you start thinking, well, as Sam McDowell knows, it only matters if you're right when you said it. So we'll see.
5 days is a long time to be relevant. You got some time.
It is, but we're on to the next if that goes that way. But I do think, I mean, when you're shooting 31% and Ochai is missing his first 10 shots, and everything's just kind of out of whack, and you still win against a pretty good team that beaten you 3 times in a row, that's a good day. And so we're not going to care about that game if they don't do something in the tournament. But I do think it's the kind of game that's a little bit of connective tissue for a program as it tries to put traction into March. And so we'll see what it means. I'm obviously looking forward to the tournament this week. There's a lot of subplots here in Kansas City. But is there any story that we care about more than them? Maybe the K-State Bruce Weber situation will loom large. But I think those are our big storylines, aren't they?
They are. And we'll talk about Bruce in a minute in Kansas State. In fact, Kansas will play the winner of the 8-9 game between Kansas State and West Virginia. We've got there is no it's a 9-team tournament this year because Oklahoma State is not eligible because of its NCAA probation. So for the first time in quite a while, there's a missing man formation at the Big 12 tournament. And years ago, Baylor was not in the Big 12 tournament because of the problems it was having. And it was an 11, back when the league was at 12, it was an 11-team tournament. So,
Blair, you probably remember this. Remember the year Missouri was on probation, ineligible to play in the NCAA tournament, but eligible to play in the Big 8 tournament.
I do remember.
And won it.
Did win it. So the automatic bid was lost for the Big 8 that year. And fortunately, that was one of those years, like most of the years in the old Big 8, you had multiple teams that made it as an at-large. But you're right. But what a good thing for Norm Stewart's guy.
That was sort of the ultimate Norm Stewart stick it to him game. I mean, that tournament, like, no, I'm not going to the national tournament this year, but by golly, we're going to win in Kansas City, Missouri.
Right. Yeah. Today we always talk about coaches needing to manufacture motivation. Norm never had to manufacture it. Or he was a factory of it, and just.
Yeah. I remember. Sorry, we're really going down a rabbit hole here, but I remember Norm being upset that Sesame Street Live was getting the Hearn Center floor for practice. And you always knew it was trouble with Norm if he took out a little piece of paper from his pocket in his post game because he wanted to read a statement. And I swear he addressed Big Bird specifically and said, my granddaughter's a big Bird fan, but do we really have to be relegated to the rafters for this? So he could find a cause.
Yes, yeah, he could as well as anybody. So you left feeling okay about KU's chances in the postseason? Because I'm kind of not there with this team. And maybe listen, college basketball. I don't know if Gonzaga's terrific. Obviously, I've seen at their best Kentucky good enough to win the national championship. Auburn also in that in that category.
I don't think Jesse thinks Auburn's in that category.
Does he have them in the top 25 this week? Or do they stay in?
Hey, look, to your broader point on this. Look, it's a little bit of a coin toss. I think they've got some stuff going on, but I think we were talking about this informally the other day. We look at point guard play as pretty essential in the NCAA tournament, and I'm not sure they have what they need there. You mentioned Kentucky. Well, part of your impression of Kentucky is blasting KU at Allen Fieldhouse. And that just in itself is a bit of an outlier for what we might see with a stellar Kansas team. So I feel like they're a Sweet 16 team with a chance to get to the Final Four. I don't feel like they're a Final Four team that's going to win the national title. I guess that's kind of how I see them.
Okay. All right.
I wonder if they should have, Remy Martin's been hurt for basically the entirety of the Big 12 conference schedule, but he's been back for these past couple of weeks. And we saw it on Saturday where he didn't even play in the second half. And I understand you've got a conference championship at stake this past week and a half. But I think if your goals are to win in March, he deserved to be a part of the rotation, because Kansas at their best includes Remy Martin, because they need a point guard who can score, like who can get into the lane with regularity. And DeJuan Harris is not that. He's got a ton of great traits, but that's just not one of them. And so I think I would have sacrificed, if you even give up something there, I would have sacrificed something over these past 2 weeks by seeing what I had in Remy Martin and what he could have provided my rotation.
Well, maybe that's what Bill Self will do in the Big 12 tournament, is give Remy Martin, just kind of force feed him some minutes to get him a little more comfortable. It is a shame for Remy, though, to transfer to Kansas, become the Big 12 preseason player of the year, and then be beset with this injury that kept him out for more than half of the season. So, hey, let's, as I said, Kansas will play the winner of Kansas State and West Virginia. Is this Bruce Weber's final stand in Kansas City this week? Sam, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it is. And I'll actually be writing about this at some point this week, but I think the K-State fans have had it better over the last 10 years than they might get it over the next 10. And especially if they get rid of Bruce Weber, or if maybe they end up calling it a retirement, whatever. But they've won 2 conference championships in the last 10 years. No other team in the Big 12 outside of Kansas can say that. And I don't think when you look at the program rankings, you think that K-State should be second best consistently in the Big 12. Now, the last 3 years, I think, is what you point to and say they're 13-41. Vahe and I were looking this up last night. In the Big 12 alone, the past 3 years, they've improved this year, but only because the past 2 were that bad. It would be a 3rd straight losing season. I still think Bruce Weber's a really good basketball coach who's not recruiting enough talent to coach. So I think that's what hurts him in the end. But like I said, I do think it's a little bit of a warning that it might not be better than what it's been under Bruce.
I team. I liked a lot of the players on this team. Nigel Pack just named first team All Big 12. So there are some pieces. It's a better team than the previous 2, but
for sure.
I'm with you on this, Sam. I just it's not happening for Bruce Weber in Manhattan. Yeah, Vahe.
And just this, it's really along the lines of what Sam said, but Sam made this point when we were talking about this the other day, that, I mean, we're not talking about his 3rd, 4th, and 5th seasons. We're talking about his 8th, 9th, and 10th seasons. And I know people were reluctant to accept him because of Frank Martin, the way that happened, all this. But even when people were reluctant to accept him, he had a completely defensible record for 7 seasons, and 6, peaking in the 6th season with the Elite 8 run. But now I think you've lost this. The case is lost. I mean, when you're that far into a program and it's sputtering like this, what is the selling point? You made a good point, Blair, about Nigel Pack. I mean, there's guys, but you don't feel any sense of traction. And I think that's the problem. And I think it's been kind of understood behind the scenes that this was sort of a prove it year for him. Not sort of, this really is a prove it year for him. And it's just been too disjointed.
Yeah, it looks. I think if this ends up being the end for Bruce Weber, we'll look back on that NCAA tournament loss in 2019 to Cal. I think it was Irvine, right? Their first round loss. They were upset. The year they were co-champs with Texas Tech, and that was sort of the beginning of the end for. It was a 4-13 game, I think, in the tournament, and they just haven't been anything like that since then. So. Let's switch it up. We haven't all talked about Missouri and the SEC and Cuonzo Martin, and there's another coach that's certainly on the hot seat, Cuonzo Martin at Missouri. They're the 12th seed taking on Ole Miss, the 13th seed in the opening round of the SEC tournament at Nashville. I just sighed. I can't believe I did that. I promised myself I would not sigh on this podcast.
Put it up on your computer screen.
Right,
Just
sighing.
don't sigh.
But,
actually, we missed the sigh, Blair.
But the reason I'm sighing is because I think, like everybody else who knows Cuonzo Martin, you want good things for him personally. I don't think that's going to be the case when the season ends for Missouri. I don't think Cuonzo Martin will be the coach at Missouri after this year. Could be wrong, but that's my sense. What about you, Vahe? Where do you come down?
I've come to feel that too. And, just again, trying to look at data. I had the number in front of me. Now I've lost it, but Missouri his record is really just so problematic after all these years. And you got to put it in the context of modern Missouri basketball too. Missouri moved to the SEC a decade ago, has not won an NCAA tournament game since going into the SEC. And it has not won a conference title since 1994. And I realize that's kind of ancient history in a way, but there was a time where Missouri was a perennial top 25, top 30 program, and with some top 10s in there, and some heartbreak that might have gone otherwise and gotten them to a Final Four. And that's just not here right now. And a problem really is, I think I use this term about Bruce Weber, but I feel like, and it breaks my heart to say it, I got to interrupt and say this because nobody wants to see Cuonzo succeed more than I do. I mean, I knew him in high school. You guys know this. Go a long way back with him. We all admire how honorable he is. Frankly, I think he's got a higher calling than coaching college basketball. But I just feel like there's no traction. I don't feel like you can say, well, this is what we're going to hang our hat on. That's a great reason to bring him back. And I realize, at least as we understand it contractually, that's a pretty hefty buyout. But I think it's also true that that numbers are negotiable, and that there's people with money. If it comes to that, and you have to consider things like all the lost revenue from the apathy around the program. I mean, that's all part of this matrix. So it gives me no pleasure to say it, but I think that there's a pretty compelling case for Missouri to move on.
I don't. College basketball's changed so much, right? Just in the last couple of years, not only in name, image, and likeness, but the transfer portal. There's conditions that exist in college basketball today that weren't there a few years ago, and some have taken full advantage of it. And Cuonzo Martin and Missouri just haven't taken full advantage of those. It doesn't seemingly not taking advantage of them.
I think you're right. And I'll just say one last thing. I think one way or another, Cuonzo's values are what they are. And he's a little quaint, if that's the right word, in terms of, I don't think he's really gotten deep into the NIL the way we thought he might. I remember, Blair, we were there talking to him at Chicken and Pickle a couple of years ago when NIL was about to come out. And I'm sure this is true. He felt like it might be an equalizer if you're a coach who doesn't go into the gray areas. But I don't think it's proven to be that way for him. And I don't think he's had a great taste for the transfer portal either. I mean, certainly things I don't think you'd say they've really prospered by it. Let's put it that way.
All right. Well, I was hopeful that we could get to some sporting, some current. Sam Ewis, you wrote the column, Vahe, about the woman chosen the best soccer player in the world in 2020. But we have run out of time, and we're going to have to pick up those topics the next time that we chat. So great catching up with both of you guys, Vahe Gregorian and Sam McDowell. And we're going to do this again on a semi-regular basis. But it was just fun for me to talk sports with these guys. And thank you, Vahe. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks so much, Blair. So great to be with you.
That'll do it for today. Thanks for listening, and thanks to Sam and Vahe for the conversation. Also, a tip of the cap to producer Monty Davis, who assembled the parts and turned it into one fine recording. I'll be back next week on a more regular schedule to talk Chiefs, Royals, Sporting KC, the current, the colleges, all things sports in Kansas City on SportsBeat KC.